Um, Aegeus is saying that Lysander has tricked Hermia into falling in love with him. And the main way we can tell that he thinks it's not completely sincere, we see feigning voice versus a feigning love, the impression of her fantasy, strong prevailment in unhardened youth. So all these things speak to Hermia's innocence, to the idea that Lysander might not be completely sincere, that he might be having ulterior motives. We don't have any reason to assume that's actually the case, but because Aegeus obviously wants Hermia to marry Demetrius, he's going to minimize um, the sincerity of her love for Lysander. So then he turns back to Theseus and says, "My gracious Duke, be it so, she will not hear before your grace consent to marry with Demetrius." And we see the note, as I already said, right? Fathers had complete authority. So technically, Hermia doesn't have a choice. She can be forced to marry, but Aegeus is coming to Theseus hoping that he can convince Hermia to see the error of her ways. He says, "I beg the ancient privilege of Athens, as she is mine, I may dispose of her, which will be either to this gentleman or to her death." So seems a little harsh, but literally according to the laws of Athens, if a child does not obey her parents, specifically her father, he could literally put her to death. So we go into, right, this first question. The choices outlined for her by Aegeus are she can, well, basically she can marry Demetrius or she can die. So Theseus takes a little bit of a softer approach. So let's look down and see how Theseus responds. And he does, looking at his answer, it helps also answer the question in number 5, which is what kind of character does Theseus have? What kind of a leader is he? Look at the way he responds to Aegeus's assertion. He's basically saying, I can either force her to marry Demetrius, or I can have her put to death. And Theseus says, "What say you, Hermia? Be advised, fair maid, that to you your father should be as a god, one that composed your beauties, yea, and one to whom you are but as a form in wax, by him imprinted and within his power to leave the figure or disfigure it. Demetrius is a worthy gentleman." So obviously we're going back into Greek culture. They had a weird idea that basically the mother was just kind of an incubator, that all of a person's personality, they sort of owe their entire creation to their father. And just like being able to, if you have soft wax, you can press something into the wax and it leaves an impression in it. Hermia is just an impression made by her father Aegeus, and it is completely within Aegeus's control to let the figure remain, let her live, or disfigure it, literally destroy it. And he says, Demetrius is a good guy. Like, we could do worse. And Hermia replies, well, so is Lysander. And Theseus says, in himself, he is, right? In his own right, as a person, sure he is. But in this kind, wanting your father's voice, the other must be held the worthier. Right? So because Lysander is not the one that her father wants her to marry, that makes him inherently less worthy, regardless of what Hermia thinks of him. And Hermia says, I would my father looked but with my eyes. We've seen that, heard that expression before, looking sort of like in To Kill a Mockingbird, right? Walk around in someone else's shoes. She said, I wish my father could look at Lysander and see him the way I see him. And Theseus turns it around and says, rather, your eyes must with his judgment look. So since you're not going to be able to change your father's mind, you need to defer to him. So Hermia asks the question, which leads us into question number 4. She says, I entreat your grace to pardon me. I do not know by what power I am made bold, nor how it may concern my modesty in such a presence here to please my thought. Even she's kind of surprised that she is bold and brave enough to argue with Theseus and to defend her love and her decision to not honor her father's wishes and marry Demetrius. She says, I beseech your grace that I may know the worst that may befall me in this case if I refuse to marry Demetrius. And, you know, it's pretty self-evident, but she's basically saying, if I don't marry Demetrius, if I stick to my guns and maintain my commitment to Lysander, what's the worst that could happen? So we already know what Aegeus wants to happen, but since Theseus is the Lord, he could override that. So she's asking, what's the worst that could happen? And so Theseus says, either to die the death or abjure forever the society of men. So he only lists 3 options, but the implied option is the one that Hermia already asks, right? So she can marry Demetrius, she can die, right, which are the 2 options that her father gave. But the third one is to abjure forever the society of men. And there's a little bit more explanation given a few lines down. He said, therefore, fair Hermia, question your desire, know your youth, examine well your blood, whether if you yield not to your father's choice, you can endure the livery of a nun. For I to be in shady cloister mute and live a barren sister all your life, chanting fate hymns to the cold, fruitless moon. Thrice blessed they that master so their blood to undergo such a maiden pilgrimage. So basically, if she does not marry Demetrius and she does not get sentenced to death, the third option would be that she would become a nun. She would live in a cloister, which I think, yeah, it's mentioned in the original vocabulary, right? A place where members of a religious community live. Basically, she will have to separate herself from society, and she would live in the Greek culture, it'd be the Temple of Athena, because they're not Judeo-Christian. And so she would remain unmarried and pure for the rest of her life, spending her whole life basically praying. And he says, thrice blessed they that master their blood and undergo such a maiden pilgrimage. So, you know, more power to you if you are willing to remain unmarried and alone and devoted to Athena your whole life. But earthlier happy is the rose distilled than that which withering on the virgin thorn grows, lives, and dies in single blessedness. So, like, great if you think you can handle that, but you would be happier if you could be married and enjoy the blessings of sharing a relationship with someone. And so those are her 3 options given her by Theseus. And Hermia says, so I will grow, so live, so die, my lord, ere I yield my virgin patent up unto his lordship, whose unwished yoke my soul consents not to give sovereignty. So with the options that Theseus gave her, she said, I would rather live as a nun. I would rather live unmarried for the rest of my life rather than marry Demetrius, give up my honor, my virginity to Demetrius, who I refuse and cannot let myself fall in love with or let myself be married to. You know, she's young, so Theseus is giving her the benefit of the doubt, cutting her some slack. He says, take time to pause. By the next new moon, the sealing day betwixt my love and me, for everlasting bond of fellowship, upon that day either prepare to die for disobedience to your father's will, or else to wed Demetrius as he would, or on Diana's altar to protest for austerity and single life. So Shakespeare is really big on, there's a saying called continuity of time. And the idea is in most Shakespearean comedies, the entire play takes place in a very fixed time frame. Often it's within a day. You know, he likes the 24-hour period. Um, and this context, there's a little bit of confusion exactly how it works, but he says by the next new moon, right? So by the day that he is supposed to marry Hippolyta, she has to decide if she's going to marry Demetrius, um, let herself be put up to death, or put herself into perpetual nunhood, chastity with the temple of Athena. And Demetrius finally puts his 2 cents in. He says, "Relent, sweet Hermia, and Lysander, yield thy crazed title to my certain right." It's like, come on, Lysander, just give it up. Hermia, go along with what your father wants. No, I'm not that bad of a guy. Give me a chance. Um, he's trying to throw his 2 cents in to appeal. And Lysander says, "You have her father's love, Demetrius. Let me have Hermia's. You marry him." So obviously, he's making a joke. It's like, you know, Hermia loves me, but if her father loves you so much, it's kind of one of those sayings, right? If you love him so much, you marry him. And Aegeus is not amused. He says, "Yes, it's true. He hath my love," referring, of course, to Demetrius. "And what is mine, my love shall render him. And she is mine, and all my right of her I do estate under Demetrius." So she's my property. I can do what I want with her. I am going to give her to Demetrius. And I won't go through this whole thing, but the final exchange between Lysander and Theseus, he says, "My lord, I am as well derived as he, and as well possessed. My love is more than his. My fortune every way is fairly ranked, if not with advantage as Demetrius. And which is more than all these boasts can be, I am beloved of beauteous Hermia. Why should I not then prosecute my right? Demetrius, I'll avouch it to his head, made love to Nadar's daughter Helena and won her soul. And she, sweet lady, devoutly dotes in idolatry upon this spotted and inconstant man." So the reason why this part is important is it goes into the personal response question, because now we have this extra part of the love triangle. It becomes a lot more complicated than a triangle, but essentially now it's kind of a love square. Lysander is saying, I am just as good as Demetrius, right? And what's more important is I actually love Hermia. Demetrius is inconsistent because he earlier wooed Helena, Nadar's daughter, and she is in love with him. She's obsessed with him. She dotes. Right? We see, right, to love with foolish fondness in idolatry. She worships him. So it seems a little inconsistent and kind of fickle. He's kind of a player that while Demetrius is trying to marry Hermia, not that long ago, he had already been in love with Helena, and now she is still in love with him. And Theseus comments, right, I must confess I've heard so much, and with Demetrius thought to have spoken thereof. So he's like, I heard about that. I meant to say something to Demetrius, but, I was a little distracted with my whole, marrying Hippolyta and everything like that. So then he finishes up, once again, reminding Hermia to think carefully, to make a good choice. And then he leaves with Aegeus and Demetrius to plan his own wedding. And so then we're left with our final exchange between Lysander and Hermia. Before we get into the Lysander suggestion, I know we're jumping a little bit, but when we look at Theseus's character, he understands the complication of the situation, and we see in his character he is trying to understand all of the players in the situation, right? He's giving everyone the opportunity to speak their piece, even Hermia, which is pretty rare because women didn't really have much of a vote, especially in Greek society. He also, right, we can see Normally, he could just condemn her to death, but he is giving her time to think about it. He's giving her time to reconsider her stubbornness and give in to her father's wishes. We also see he's pretty traditional in that he does acknowledge the father's right to control his daughter's destiny. So that's hopefully going to give you a little bit of insight, if you didn't already have it, into question number 5 and 6. The last part, and then I'll come back with a different video to discuss Helena and Hermia's relationship. And obviously these are optional, but hopefully they're helpful and gain a better insight to this. So after everyone leaves, you have Lysander and Hermia. And Lysander says, "How now, my love? Why is your cheek so pale? How chance the roses there do fade so fast?" And Hermia says, "Belike for want of rain, which I could well besteam them from the tempest of my eyes." So she's pale, and she's saying it's because she's sort of using an extended metaphor, an analogy. She's comparing her cheeks, the paleness of her face, to the roses in her cheeks fading away. And she says, right, "Belike from want of rain, which I could well besteam with the tempest of my eyes." So the roses of my cheeks have paled because they are lacking water, and I would water them with my tears. Of course, she's probably pale because she's just been told she can't marry the man she loves, and if she doesn't agree to what her father says, she's going to die. And this is a really famous quote in Lysander's response. He says, "I me, for aught that I ever read, could ever hear by tale or history, the course of true love never did run smooth, but either it was different in blood." I'll pause there for a second. Right, the course of true love never did run smooth. Probably none of you knew that it came from Midsummer Night's Dream, but right, he's true story, or at least all the good stories, right? You never have a love story unless people have had to overcome obstacles, right? The course of true love never did run smooth. And then he lists the reasons why, or the ways in which the course of true love is thwarted, right? The way true love is always blocked or made more difficult. And of course, when we talk about comedies, if there's no obstacle, there's no humor, there's no sort of excitement in the happy ending if it's easy the whole time. So she says, either it was different in blood or else misgaffed in respective years. So right, either they are of different class, or there's a difference in age, or else it stood upon the choice of friends. So the people around them didn't approve, which of course is the situation they're in. Or if there were a sympathy in choice, war, death, or sickness lay siege to it, making it momentary as a sound, swift in shadow, short as any dream, brief as the lightning in the cold night, that in his spleen unfolds both heaven and earth. And ere a man hath power to say, behold, the jaws of darkness do devour it up, so quick bright things come to confusion. So even if everything else is fine, there's always some outside force, right? Death or war or sickness or something that prevents the course of true love running smoothly. And Hermes says, okay, well, then if true loves have ever been crossed, it stands as an edict in destiny. So then let us teach our trial patience, because it is a customary cross. So she's saying, well, if that's the way it is for all the great loves throughout history, then we're in good company, and that should help us be more patient and deal with our situation. And so Lysander now has his other choice. Right? He says, a good persuasion. Right? This is a good way to think about it. Now, hear me, Hermia. Right? Here's his out of the box solution. Therefore hear me, Hermia, I have a widow aunt, a dowager of great revenue, and she hath no child. From Athens is her house remote 7 leagues, and she respects me as her only son. There, gentle Hermia, may I marry thee, and to that place the sharp Athenian law cannot pursue us. If thou lovest me, then steal forth thy father's house tomorrow night, and in the wood a league without the town, where I did meet thee once with Helena, to do observance to a mom of May, there will I stay for thee. So instead of taking any of the options that Theseus or her father offered her, Lysander says, I have a rich aunt who lives outside of Athens, outside of the law of Athens. So meet me in the woods tomorrow night, and we will run away together and get married in secret. So since the town is outside of Athens, then Theseus's law, her father's law, is not doesn't apply to them. And so, right, it's a spot that they know about. It's a spot that we know that also Helena is also aware of this spot. So we know that, again, since it's our second reference to her, we're probably going to see her again. And we have a little bit of hyperbole in Hermia's response. She said, my good Lysander, I swear to thee by Cupid's strongest bow, by his best arrow with the golden head, by that simplicity of Venus's dove, by that fire which burned the Carthage queen. Right, so by all these great, amazing, noble promises, all the vows that men have ever broke, tomorrow I will meet with thee. So she says, come hell or high water, right, all the greatest promises I can make, tomorrow I will meet with you. Okay. And Lysander says, great, look, here comes Helena, the person we've just been talking about. And Hermia says, Godspeed, fair Helena, whither away? Whither means where. So whither away means where are you going? And I will pick that up in the next video. This is part of your personal response